She called me a disgrace at my father's funeral. I'm a general. Game on. My name is Major General Heidi Bruce, and I stood as a stranger in my own home. The air in the Blackwood family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was thick with the scent of money and grief. My army service uniform felt like a foreign object in this sea of curated sorrow, a stark, unwelcome truth in a house built on beautiful lies. Senator Thompson, an old friend of my father's, took my hand. "Heidi," he said, his voice firm with respect, "your father was so proud. This country owes you a great deal." Before I could reply, my mother, Seraphina Blackwood, slid to my side, her smile polished to a terrifying sheen. "Oh, Senator, you're far too kind," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Heidi has always been so civic-minded. She just volunteers at her unit, you see." A way to keep her busy, in one perfectly crafted sentence, she had reduced 25 years of my service to a hobby. The moment the senator was out of earshot, her smile vanished. Her fingers clamped around my bicep. "The library, now," she hissed. She pulled me into the mahogany-paneled room that had been my father's sanctuary. The photograph of me on graduation day at West Point, once hung proudly above the fireplace, was gone. In its place was a massive new oil painting of my brother, Julian. I had been officially erased. "I told you not to come here in that costume," she seethed, her eyes sweeping over my uniform with undisguised disgust. "You shame us. You shame his memory." "This uniform honored him, Mother," I said, my voice low and steady. Her composure only fueled her fire. "Honored him?" she laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You are a glorified helper, a glorified clerk who gets to play soldier. Don't you dare stand in my house and talk about honor." She stepped closer, her face contorted. "You are nothing but an embarrassment." And then her hand, clad in a pristine white glove, swung through the air. The sharp crack echoed in the silent, book-lined room. A fire bloomed on my cheek. I didn't flinch. My gaze flickered to the doorway. Julian stood there, swirling a glass of Macallan 18. He had seen it all. He met my eyes, gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug, and turned his attention back to his drink. That single, dismissive gesture was more brutal than the slap. In this house, I was utterly, irrevocably alone. A week after the funeral, I was evicted. A clipped, impersonal call from my mother's lawyer informed me that my personal belongings needed to be removed from my room within 48 hours for comprehensive renovations. I packed my life into a single military footlocker and dragged it out of the house as my mother discussed paint swatches with an interior designer, not even bothering to look up. I was a 2-star general, and in my own home, I was as invisible as a ghost. The civilian world was just as dismissive. At an interview for a top-tier security consulting firm, a young recruiter looked at my decorated career, a career forged in the crucible of leadership where decisions meant life or death, and told me my background seemed to be in general support operations. My mother's insult, dressed up in corporate jargon. I was adrift in a sea of my own perceived irrelevance when a lifeline appeared. Captain Callan Vance, my brother's fiancé and an Air Force officer, asked to meet me. "Ma'am," she said, her posture perfect as she sat across from me in a quiet cafe. I was at the reception. "I saw what your mother did." Her eyes were filled with a fiery indignation. "Julian and your mother only know you through press clippings. I know you from the smell of smoke and the sound of rotor blades." She told me a story I had long buried: a rescue mission in the Karangal Valley where I had overruled a command decision and personally led a quick reaction force to save her trapped reconnaissance team. "Your mother called you a helper," Callan said, tears of anger in her eyes. "But to me, and to the 11 other souls you pulled out of that valley, ma'am, you were God." She pushed a spare key to her secure Arlington apartment across the table. "Consider it your forward operating base. I am your soldier, General." On any battlefield. The war escalated a few days later. My mother and Julian appeared at my apartment, bearing a lavish gift basket and an Oscar-worthy performance of apology and concern. It was a classic love bombing campaign. The real demand came when Julian placed a thick leather-bound portfolio on my kitchen table. It was a massive defense subcontract, but the prime contractor required a board member with an active top secret or C clearance to act as a guarantor. "It's just a formality," Julian said with a conspiratorial gleam in his eye. "You just sign here. That general star on your shoulder still has value to us." I scanned the fine print. A shell corporation, vaguely worded liability clauses, a contractor notorious for cutting corners. This wasn't a contract. It was a trap. They were asking me to be the fall guy, to sign away my honor for their greed. The last thread of hope for any semblance of family snapped. "No," I said. My voice as cold and hard as steel. I held out the portfolio. "Take your proposal and leave my home." They stormed out, their masks of concern replaced by unveiled rage. The line had been drawn. Now it was my turn to attack. I called Ares Thorne, a legend from the Dia and my father's best friend. He didn't offer platitudes. He offered a strategy. "Your mother is conducting a systematic information warfare campaign," he said, his voice calm and analytical. "We will mount a proportional response." His study transformed into our situation room. We mapped the battle space, identifying their weaknesses, arrogance and dependence on public image. Our objective was not revenge. It was threat neutralization. We would build a dossier. Captain Vance was our asset in place. Under the guise of wedding planning, she copied Julian's hard drive, a gold mine of emails that laid out their premeditated plot to disinherit me and have me declared mentally unfit. Julian himself provided the next piece of evidence, calling me to bully and threaten me into signing the contract. The entire conversation was captured by a button-sized recorder from Ares. The final, secret weapon, however, came from my father. In a false bottom of his old footlocker, I found his private journal and a sealed codicil to his will. The journal was a silent witness to my struggle, filled with his pride in me and his fear of my mother's cruelty. The codicil, notarized 6 months before his death, stipulated that his entire personal estate including the deed to the Greenwich house was to be placed in a private trust with a sole trustee, me. He had foreseen their greed. He had left me a shield, a weapon, and checkmate. The annual Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was my mother's throne room. I walked in, flanked by Ares and my lawyer, wearing a simple black dress, my own kind of armor. At the height of the evening, as Serafina stood on stage giving a speech on legacy, our counteroffensive began. Captain Callan Vance, in her crisp Air Force uniform, walked to the edge of the stage, took a microphone, and strode directly towards me. In the dead silence of the Temple of Dender, she executed a salute so sharp it seemed to cut the air. "Major General Bruce," she said, her voice ringing with unwavering respect. "It is an honor." Before the room could process it, the massive screen behind my mother flickered to life. The dossier. Julian's voice filled the cavernous hall, laced with threats and condescension. Emails detailing their plot to disinherit me flashed on the screen. The whispers in the crowd grew into a roar of shock and outrage. My mother's face crumbled. Then, my lawyer calmly walked onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I have a legal announcement." He held up the codicil. Per the last will and testament of Colonel Sterling Bruce, his entire personal estate is to be transferred immediately into a private trust. The sole trustee with absolute and final authority is his daughter, Major General Heidi Bruce. The dam broke. Serafina staggered back, her hand at her throat. Julian, swarmed by journalists alerted by a timely tip from Ares, looked like a cornered animal. In the midst of the chaos, I walked onto the stage and took the microphone from my mother's limp hand. "Honor," I said, my voice calm and clear, "is not something you inherit or purchase at an auction. It is something you build with your actions. My father's true legacy was his service and his integrity. And tonight, that legacy has been secured." I placed the microphone on the podium and walked out of the hall, leaving the smoldering ruins of their empire behind me. Victory was not a triumphant parade. It was the quiet that followed a long, brutal war. Julian's texts were a barrage of vitriol. My mother's response was a damning silence. I didn't feel elation. I felt the bone-deep exhaustion of a soldier after a grueling campaign. My mother appeared at my apartment weeks later, a diminished woman, her arrogance replaced by a raw, desperate panic. She begged me to forgive her, to call off the lawyers, to save her from losing the house. I looked at the woman who had caused me a lifetime of pain, and I felt only a profound, weary pity. "I forgive you, Mother," I said, my voice calm. "I forgive you for not being the mother I needed. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation." I gently closed the door, a final, necessary act of self-preservation. I didn't evict her. Instead, I used the legal authority from my father's trust to establish the Colonel Sterling Bruce Legacy Foundation. Its mission: to provide college scholarships for the children of fallen and wounded service members. Its funding would come entirely from the assets in my father's trust. In a final, beautiful irony, my mother would be allowed to remain in the Greenwich house as a tenant, required to pay fair market rent each month directly to the foundation. Her rent checks, a monthly tribute to the honor she could never understand, would now fund the futures of the very military families she had despised. My new life was quiet and steady. The foundation's headquarters was a modest space filled with the aroma of brewing coffee and the rustle of letters from the first class of scholarship recipients. These letters, these testaments to renewed hope, were the most profound medals I had ever earned. One spring afternoon, I stood on the stage at West Point, a guest lecturer speaking to senior cadets. I didn't speak of tactics. I spoke of the war within. "Your true, unassailable honor," I told them, "is a fortress inside you. It is the one piece of ground that no enemy can ever take unless you open the gates for them. Guard that fortress." As I walked across the plain at dusk, the first stars of the evening beginning to appear, I thought of my father. I was no longer searching for his stars in the darkness. I had learned to navigate by my own. My story taught me that honor is a fortress, and I had to be its staunchest defender. Perhaps your journey has also been about guarding your own fortress against those who were supposed to be your allies. You are not alone in your battle. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Chosen Revenge. Here, we share stories that remind us of our own strength and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim our lives. You are seen. You are heard.